Hello friends, it's Katey, and it is nearing the end of the year, which means that I am recording and sharing with you my current tarot deck collection. I like to do this every year, just as kind of like an update and kind of like a diary for myself, a record for myself of what has come and gone from my life in the past 12 months. So unlike last year where I separated this into two videos, I'm just going to put this all in one. So these are all of my tarot decks, both in print, out of print, indie, all of the above. Just be aware of that. But I think this is a lot of fun. I always love doing these videos, and I love watching these videos from other people too. So let's get into it. It's not going to be a short video, and I hope you enjoy. So obviously, this is in no order at all, but I'm just going to start with the Anarchy because it's right by me, and it's actually in order at the moment. This is one of my most used decks ever. I just absolutely love this deck. I love how it feels like such a storybook, and I love how Anarchy has managed to kind of strip back all of that really heavy, deep, ancient symbolism and just really kind of brought through the meaning and the message of the card through emotion and through expression and through color and light. I think she's done such a great job of really producing a readable deck, and I love it. It's one of my most used, as I said, and I use it for reading for myself, readings for others, for my therapeutic tarot stuff. It's just an absolute staple in my collection. And I did also very recently get the self-published second edition, which is quite a bit smaller. And the colouring is slightly different. The borders are a little bit different. But yeah, the opportunity came up in a trade, and I've always been curious, and as it is one of my favourite decks, I thought it would be fun to have the self-published edition too. And I'm low-key in love, guys. It's awesome. So, I don't know, do you class it as one or two decks? I mean, I know it's physically two decks, but it's the same deck. I don't know. But anyway, the Anarchy would be my first. Next is an old favourite of mine, a deck that I picked up from its Savers, and I'm so glad that I did. I don't use it as much as I used to anymore, but this is a really special deck to me. It's one that kind of really helps me understand how to read tarot back when I was first learning, and I just think it's such a wonderful deck. Obviously it is one that I use just for myself, largely because of the inclusion of one card that I find problematic, which is the schizophrenia card. However, overall, and including that card, to be honest, this has been a really important deck for me. A really healing deck too. So it's one of my all-time favorites because it was so special to me when I first started learning. And I honestly I think it's really beautiful. And I love how, even though it still is very much based on the Rider-Waite-Smith meanings, it's a new take on it. And I think it's a really beautiful and well-considered, thoughtful take. Next up is the Sasuraibito Tarot, or the Sassy Burrito, as it has been fondly dubbed in the community. This is a deck that's fairly new to me. I've had it maybe 4 or 6 weeks, I don't know. I'm so bad with time, but it has very quickly become a favorite and one that I go to and read a lot. It's got a modern sort of twist to some of the cards, which is not something I was super sure I'd be really excited to work with, but it just works. It works so well. And the little guidebook that comes with it is really good. It's not very long, it's quite concise, but I think it's been really well put together. What is included is really effective and clear. And often, if for whatever reason when I'm reading for myself the meaning doesn't jump out to me, or I'm just curious, I'll go to the book and it's just so spot on. So the cards themselves, super intuitive and super clear for me, and then the book as well has been just really fun to work with too. So the Sasuraibito, such a wonderful deck, and I love that backing. Next is another deck that I have 2 copies of. This was my original copy that I trimmed, and I wrote the titles down the bottom. It is of course Stella's Tarot. And this is one of my favorite decks ever. Certainly top 10 most used decks as well. I just love the colors, and I think it's a talkative deck with a lot of character, which makes it a lot of fun to read with. And it's just really clear. And I love, there's quite a bit of movement and this like star sort of imagery as well. I just think it's such a fabulous deck. It has gone out of print recently, but not very long ago. So, I mean, you never know. AGM might bring it back, or I don't imagine you should have to spend too much on it, given that it was only out of print like a year, if that. So it's such a wonderful deck and one of my favorites. And yeah, I did trade for a second copy because I regretted trimming it a little bit, but since having it back in the non-trimmed version, the trimmed copy has grown on me even more. So I currently have 2 editions, and I'm not quite sure what I'm planning on doing, but it's such a fabulous deck and one that I adore. But you can see it makes it almost like a pocket deck once you've trimmed it, because the borders really were quite big. Next is my favorite deck ever, which I've heard rumors that US Games are thinking about bringing this deck back in print, which I will not be sad about, because that means that I can stock up on backup copies. The Gill Tarot is just like my soul manifest in a deck. I remember when I first started showing it, people were just like, what the hell is that? They thought it was brash and ugly and all sorts of things. But it seems to have grown in popularity lately, and I don't know whether that's, you just kind of see something more and you learn to appreciate it over time, or if it's because the 90s are coming back and this was published in the 90s, I don't know. Or maybe it's just Joe Gill's time to shine. I don't know. Whatever. This deck is just the most fabulous, most readable, most profound, most nurturing, most powerful deck for me that I've ever worked with. It's not one that I use for other people because it feels really personal to me and my journey. It's just a really important deck for me. And I knew it from the instant that I saw it on Eclectic Tarot. There's 9 images up there, and just the instant I saw it, I was like, that's my deck. Next up, we have one that is quite a bit of a darling in the community at the moment, or it was a few months ago. It's the Stretch Tarot, and I do believe that the creator is reprinting this deck, so it will be available again shortly. And I love that it's kind of got like gothic, vintage Morgan Greer backings. This is a deck that I just normally, this sort of style would not be something that I would normally be drawn to. But for some reason, I was really drawn to this deck. And when the opportunity came up for me to get it in a trade, I said, yes, please. And I really like it. I've read with it a couple of times, not a lot. I think I kind of got it at the end of winter, and it's kind of just started to get very hot, very dry. And I don't know, it doesn't quite feel like I want to be pulling this deck out when it's, 30 degrees outside. But I do really like it. I love the colors. I think it's been really well done. And I love some of the cards are just so interesting. And they do have like the titles. I don't know if you call that a keyword or a title. I kind of feel more like they're titles. They're all really effective for me. They work. That's always kind of like a risk when you get decks like this where they have the keyword or title, where you're like, is that going to work for me? These work for me. So I love the images that they've chosen. Collage decks aren't always my thing, but this one I think has just been really thoughtfully done. And I love that there's actually quite a lot of layers and dimension to this deck. It doesn't feel super flat, which I think some collage decks can, and it's a bit weird. I really like how this one's been done. The next is this deck, which I don't know what it's called, because I think this is more like description of what's in the box rather than a name of a tarot deck. But it's a Polish deck that I got in a trade train this year, and I haven't really used it much, but I do really, really like it. I love the colors. And I like how it's fairly traditional. Well, it is pretty traditional, especially with the major arcana. I think it's so pretty, all the colours. I did get it, I don't know, kind of like late autumn, early winter. I'm not sure. And it just didn't feel like a good time to pull it out. I'm thinking this might more be the lighter half of the year sort of deck. So I'm hoping its time will come soon, because I really like it. And one of the things that I did really like about this deck, and why it was on my wish list, was because of the pips. Now, I don't really read Marseille, but I do love kind of more stripped back pips. I love semi-scenic pips, which this deck really kind of epitomizes, I think. It's not that they're just 3 swords, you know, with pretty foliage around it, but it's not super Marseille, but it's still just the pips. They're just arranged, and they use colour and light to really tell the story. And so I really, really like that. It's something that really attracted me to this deck. Another deck that I don't really know how to say the name of is the Linde Famira deck, which is this mini German deck that is quite hard to get your hands on, because it was just published in a magazine, and you kind of tore up the paper. You know, it's perforated and you tore the cards apart. And obviously it's from Germany. It's just a little black and white deck, and it's a really cool little deck. I used it a lot, especially last year. Haven't used it so much this year. I don't know, black and white just hasn't quite been my thing this year. But I do really like it how it's kind of, because of the size, they've had to simplify it in a lot of cases. But it's still very Waite Smith. Is wearing kind of like the same outfit. Although we have like skeletons down the bottom. So it has its own twist. I think it's quite a cool, interesting little deck. And then of course, like almost every other tarot person on the planet, I have Waite Smith as well. And perhaps not like every other tarot person on the planet, I have a few copies of the Waite Smith. This one that I'm holding is the Centennial Edition, and is probably my go-to, most used. And then I have several other editions of the US Games yellow box, the blue box, and the UK purple box. And I've done videos kind of talking about the differences. So yeah, I have to include these in my collection, obviously, but I didn't want to have to go through every single one, because, you know, we know what the Waite Smith looks like, and of course I've done comparison videos. So if that interests you, feel free to go and geek out on one of those videos. Next up we have the beautiful, the one and only Liminal Tarot by Penelope Klein. And oh my god, this deck smells so good. Every time I take it out of the box, I'm just like, oh, you smell divine. And this is the backing. I love the backing. This is now an out of print deck. I bought it when it was still in print and did a walkthrough of it. It was a limited edition of only 200. I have number 111, which I think is amazing. But as far as I'm concerned, this is one of the most beautiful decks ever made. It's just totally my sort of art style. It's traditional in a lot of ways, but also totally its own style and its own take on a lot of the cards. This is one of my favorite cards. There's a few that are quite changed in their depiction, not really in their meaning, but in their depiction, that just kind of really got me. We already saw the there was another one too. The Four of Swords was another one that I loved. I just love the lines and the light in this deck. It's such a beautiful one. So glad that this is part of my collection. While we're talking about some of my favorite decks, let's talk about the fantastic Menagerie. This deck is by Bubba Studios, and we all know Bubba Studios is always coming back with their old out of print decks, so you never know with this one. I got this one in a trade, and I'm so glad I did. I was always curious about this deck. I didn't think I would ever get it, but I was curious, and when someone offered to trade with me, I traded 8 decks for this one. And I would do it over again any day of the week. I had no idea how I was going to go actually working with it, but I just adored it. I absolutely adored it, and I still do. It quickly became one of my most used and has remained so. It's just so readable, and it has such a personality and its own voice. It's just it's clear, but it's also just a lot of fun. And I love this Hangman. And of course this is based on the artwork of JJ Granville, but Bubba Studios has done their own thing with it, and I love it. I love it. Such a cool deck. Now onto a deck that was out of print when I first started showing this deck, and then came back into print, and everyone was very happy. It is the Tarot of the Crone by Ellen Lorenzi Prince. Now, Ellen Lorenzi Prince has done a couple of other decks, including her very, very popular Dark Goddess, which I did have for a little while, but just didn't quite do it for me. Whereas this deck, I really like this deck a whole lot more. I don't use it very often, just because I find it really intense. But it's a great one to journal with and spend some time with. It's a very, very powerful one, and the guidebook that comes with it is great, although I often go onto Ellen's website because she has a little bit more on there, including like little poems for a lot of the cards, and I really like that. Next up is another deck that kind of comes and goes in terms of being in print, and I know is coming back in print very soon, is the Circo Tarot. This is one of my favorite and most used decks. I just absolutely adore it. I was really captivated by it online, and so when it came up on Kickstarter for a reprinting last time, I backed it. I don't really like backing on Kickstarter very much, but I knew, I'd wanted this deck for long enough that I kind of really made sure that I got a copy that time. But I know the artist is coming back out with pre-orders soon, and they've also, I don't know if they've finished, but they're in the process of creating an oracle deck with a very similar style. So that I am very curious to see, because this deck just works so well for me. It's pretty traditional in a lot of senses, but also just kind of really playful and creative as well, and very circusy, which I love. It definitely has its own personality. I really like this too. This Page of Cups is just one of my favorite things in the tarot world ever. I just love it. The first time I saw this, I just laughed out loud, and I didn't stop laughing for like a good several minutes. I just thought it was so funny and such a simple thing to do, but also really quite genius. I don't know. I just got a lot of kicks out of this card, and it's still one of my favorite things. The Watersprite Tarot is another one that I use a lot, especially in readings for others. It's a bit of a workhorse deck for me. I just think it's such a fabulous deck. Now, in terms of this one, I have the Llewellyn edition, which is out of print, but the artist has republished independently, which you can still get. And she's changed, I think, 2 of the cards, one of which is the sun, and that definitely needed changing. But I just prefer the colouring in this one. The other one, the saturation's up a bit higher, and I found it a little bit harder to see, but I do have funny eyes. I know a lot of people say that the new independently published edition is a big improvement on this one. I just personally wanted this one. It just really demonstrates a lot of different body types and different types of people, and celebrates just how different we all are. Different yet the same, I feel like, is what this deck is all about. We're all so different, but we can still come together and celebrate each other and celebrate ourselves. So I use this deck a lot when, when I sense somebody's kind of lacking confidence, or that's what they're really looking for, is like a bit of a confidence boost, or questions around work or money, questions around the body, questions around passion, and direction, all of that stuff. I find like this deck just is perfect for that. I think it's a great deck in general, but that's the stuff that this deck really comes forward for me. And the court cards are renamed, but apart from that, it's reasonably traditional, just kind of a whole lot more diverse and interesting and fabulous. which is what I love about it. Next up we have a deck that I fell in love with the second that I saw it on Kasha's channel, Tarot Map. It's the Mesquite Tarot, which does come with a really cute little book. Now this deck I actually haven't connected with as quickly or as strongly as I kind of imagined I would. Instead, I've connected much more with the Sasuraibito, which I bought when I bought this deck. But it's still one that I just really am drawn to. I love the color palette. I love the kind of stripped back, especially the pips, but all of these cards are kind of stripped back. And what I absolutely love is the court cards. Now, quite a few decks try to rename the court cards, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't so much, whereas I just, as soon as Kasha was like saying the names of the court cards, I was like, I'm done. I need that deck. I just think that they chose really well, that they still really kind of managed to capture the whole, I don't know if hierarchy is the right word, but development stages maybe, and the way that we are within the world. And I mean, a lot of the images of people are more silhouettes, so it's kind of like a gender and race neutral deck. But in the few instances where we actually do see skin color, it's still really quite diverse, which is just a wonderful thing to see. I think this is a really simple but open deck, and I love that about it. I also just really like the art style. It's quite simple, and it doesn't, I don't know, there's not a lot of movement or things like that, but it just works. I think it's been done really, really beautifully. Next up we have an old favorite of mine. It's the Royal Fez Moroccan, or the Royal Moroccan Fez. I don't know, I always get that around the wrong way. But I just love this deck. I know it is not to everybody's tastes. I either get people in the comments going, what the hell, that looks so dumb, or oh my god, that's amazing. There's no in between with this deck. I'm definitely all the way on the side of that's amazing. I love it. I really love the selective use of colour mixed with the kind of really detailed line drawings. I love how it's traditional, but also that it's quite playful. I've said that this deck reminds me of Gawain from Merlin, the BBC series, that it's a royal that doesn't give a shit about royalty. Like, it feels like Gawain in a deck. Like, it is so self-deprecating, it doesn't respect authority, it's quite satirical, and I think it's a lot of fun. I really enjoy working with this deck, and it very often makes me laugh out loud. So it's a deck that I really, really love, and one that's just a pleasure to own and a pleasure to read with. And I think it's really quite beautiful too. Next we have a Rider-Waite-Smith clone, and I think this is called the Universal Tarot. I've trimmed mine. It came in like a beginner's tarot box that I got on sale because the box was damaged at a bookshop. So yeah, I've trimmed mine and edged mine in gold, and this is kind of my pocket deck that I take away for the weekend, or if there's room in my bag and, you know, I'm going out for a day with my mum, I'll take this in my bag. It's bigger than the Mesquite Tarot and stuff, but it's a lot smaller than a regular deck, and it's very Rider-Waite, but the colors, I think, you know, they're softer and they're prettier in a lot of ways. I love my Rider-Waite-Smith, but yeah, just like the blues, they're a bit watery and pretty, and yeah, I don't know. I really like this deck. You know, it's not something to write home about. It still is just a clone, but I think of all the really true clones, the modern clones, that I've seen anyway, this would be my favorite. Next we have the Little Monsters Tarot, which is such a beautiful deck and was one of my top decks to get this year, and the wonderful Krishna Priya sent it to me. Originally I traded with Nobody's Here for a trimmed copy, but then at the same time Krishna sent me this, which was very, very exciting, and it's such a beautiful deck. And I've really enjoyed working with it. It's kind of got a softer voice. You got to draw it out. It feels a bit dreamy and kind of like a child who's off in a daydream, I don't know, and trying to have a proper conversation with them can be a bit hard, but also really beautiful. I don't know, that's what it reminds me of. And it also reminds me so much of Studio Ghibli and those sort of creatures in those films, a lot of them. Like there's one that really seriously reminds me of No Face. The only thing I will say is that the cardstock is a bit funny, not the actual stock itself, but the printing. I don't know if this shows up very well, but I mean, I've shuffled this a few times and it's almost like the ink isn't sealed or something. Like it tends to come off onto the rest of the cards, so even though they're white cardstock, they almost look dirty. But that's a whatever sort of thing. It's a bit of a shame, but also I don't really care. I'm not a super fussy on that sort of stuff, and I just think it's such a cute, beautiful deck, and I really like the guidebook. Love how there's hints to the Rider-Waite-Smith, but then it's like its own little world. Super cute. I really love it, and all of them look so different and unique. It's really interesting. Another of my fun, cute little decks is the Whispering Tarot by Elizabeth Hazel. Now this is a limited edition print, I think, but I'm pretty sure she still has some copies. It's not a particularly popular deck, although I'm not quite sure why, because I love it. It's quite small, and I mean, not everyone's into this art. It's kind of more, I don't know, people say it's childish, and that sounds mean. I get what they're saying, but I love it. I really, really like it. This deck, it kind of feels like if the Tarot of the She went more fairy tale, but still maintained a lot of its power. I don't know if that makes sense. It feels very fae. There's a lot of little creatures and things running around and unicorns, and I love that the elements come alive in this deck. There's a lot of that where like the wind or the sea is like literally alive, and it's just beautifully demonstrated. I also have the little guidebook with this deck, which is awesome, and Elizabeth Hazel has also written a book. See, again, we have the clouds that are, I don't know, I just love that. She's also written a book about elemental dignities, which I haven't read, but, you know, that's a really interesting topic. Love, the princesses are all like really, really cute, and yeah, there's a lot of like mythological creatures like dragons and unicorns, and I love this. Oh, it's just one of the most adorable decks. But let me tell you, its readings pack a punch. Like, it looks like it could be too sweet, but it's not. It's got that kind of biting tongue to it that I think, you know, is typical of more fae style decks. And even though this isn't like absolutely exclusively fae, like the Tarot of the She, for example, it feels kind of like this is its own fae world of some description. Like, I don't imagine these to be humans. I imagine these to be like little people. That's definitely how it feels for me anyway. I just think one of my favorite Seven of Cups. I just love it. I love this deck. I love the colors. I love the imagery. And I just love the world that has just been created here. The Incidental Tarot was another one that was at the top of my wish list for this year. But unfortunately, unlike the Little Monsters Tarot, I have struggled to connect with this deck, which makes me sad because I've wanted this for a very long time, and it looks like the sort of deck that I should really get on with, but I just don't quite know how. I don't know. I don't exactly know what it is that's stopping me either. And it's been with me since the early part of 2017, so it's kind of coming up to the point where I'm like, do I keep trying, or is it time to just move on? But I really like the imagery. I think it's beautiful. And again, I love the pips. I think they're really interesting, how they're like semi-scenic. They kind of tell a story without creating an actual scene of people doing something, you know. I think it's really cool. And the courts have been changed a lot, in that each court, all of the 16 courts have a different name, a different title. So yeah, there's quite a bit that's been changed, but it's really beautiful. Next up we have the Bad Bitches Tarot by Ethany. This is a really unique, interesting, playful deck. And I love talking to Ethany about how organically the creation of this deck just kind of like happened. I think it's such an interesting, modern, fun take on the tarot, and I just think it's awesome. And I also just love the production quality in general. I mean, we all know Ethany's a big fan of good quality tarot cards herself, and these are just beautiful with the gilding. I will say that the diversity in this deck is lacking, I think, in a lot of cases, which is a shame, and I know that that's something important to Ethany. I know that she really took care to include that, especially in her Awakened Soul Oracle, which was amazing. This deck still has such a fun, sassy personality, and the book that Ethany's written, I mean, I love the book, I think, even more than I like the deck. Like, the book just feels like a girlfriend telling it to you straight, you know? Like, it's fun. It feels like, I don't know. It just feels like you're having a sleepover with some girlfriends and having a few too many wines or something. I don't know. It just is really playful. And I think it's a really interesting take on the tarot. Next up, we have the Hezicos Tarot, which is another one of my old favorites, staples, go-to, always used, well-loved decks. I did a review finally of this deck not too long ago. It's a deck that I have loved and used for years now, and it's one that I use for myself and for when I'm reading for other people a lot. I love the colours, and this Judgment card, it's just beautiful. I think it was, if it wasn't the first indie deck I ever bought, it was one of. And I just think it's so beautiful. The colours, and it really has created its own world. It's quite playful and cheeky. Cheeky is a good word for this deck, I think. But it also doesn't shy away from those darker cards. It has a lot of depth to it, and there's a lot more to this deck than just the pastel colours and the fairy tale creatures, you know. So this is I love this Four of Swords. Such a beautiful card. And the cards, everything about this deck is just wonderful. This is a deck that I do obviously have, obviously, but I'm thinking I might move on. It's a Ravenswood Eastern Tarot, and it's basically just a really cool Rider-Waite Smith base deck, black and white. This is a bit of like a used copy, and I don't have the box with it, and I really like it. It's just not something that I use a lot. So yeah, I don't know. I'm open to trades. It is out of print, but I think it's a really cool little deck. So if you want to either trade or purchase this from me, feel free to email me. As I said, you know, it's a used deck. It has some marks and stuff, and you know, it's not mint condition. So if you're a stickler for that kind of stuff, maybe this isn't the copy for you. But yeah, I don't know. It's a cool little deck. And if you're into black and white decks, I think this is an interesting one with its own sort of cultural flair too. I love how the devil, he's got like 4 arms. This is probably the dirtiest card, which is a bit of a shame. The star's quite pretty, isn't it? I really like the moon. There's a lot about this deck that I do really like. And the pips are quite Rider-Waite Smithy. Is that a word? Can it be a word? I feel like that would just be really helpful if that was a word. Next up is a deck that I'm not going to show you because it is in plastic wrap. It's the Fountain Tarot. Now, I bought the Fountain Tarot. I didn't back it on Kickstarter, but I bought it not too long after it was released, and it quickly became one of my most used decks. I don't know. There was something about it that I wasn't in love with it. Like, I didn't feel passion towards it because it's quite cold in many ways. But equally, reading with it was a breeze, you know, it was so easy to read with. But I had an opportunity to trade for a deck that I really wanted, and the only deck that person wanted was this one. So I ended up trading it, knowing that that deck was out of print and the Fountain I could get again easily. And eventually I did. I bought it again off someone here in Melbourne. But that was just before winter, and I don't know, I just didn't feel like working with it, so I thought I'd leave it in its wrap. And I'm definitely, I don't know, I've been kind of seeing the Fountain Tarot around, especially now that the new edition is released, and I'm definitely wanting to open this deck up again, so that might be happening soon. But this is a deck that's in my collection. This is the little Nova Tarot, which is in this cute little set that is sometimes kind of hard to open. But I bought this at the Haunted Bookshop here in Melbourne not too long ago. And it's this cute little mini deck, which is kind of fun to read with, actually. And I think it looks like it'll be a total novelty deck, but there's a lot more depth and thought that has gone into this deck than you might first suspect. The book's interesting. Obviously it's not very big. It's the size of this little box. But you know, it's kind of got a sentence or two about each card, so it's there, the information's there. And I think it's a fun little deck. I think technically it's out of print, but I very often see it in bookshops and things. Lots of like animated animals, or not animated, like personified sort of animals in this deck. Yeah, it's an interesting little thing and super cute. I love that backing. Next we have the Aquarian Tarot. Now I have a vintage edition, which sounds very fancy. That's the backing. It's very pretty. This is pretty new to me, so I haven't worked with it at all. But I got it in a trade, and I'd always been curious about this deck, and yeah, I don't know, I thought it kind of reminds me of the colours of the Hezicos Tarot, but it's a little bit different. And I know that this is kind of, this and the Morgan Greer are kind of like the classic original clones, if that makes sense. That's how I've always kind of interpreted them anyway. It's a bit strange to me though, how like these colours are really kind of blocky, and then the faces very soft and detailed. But it's interesting. I really love the colours in the swords. Next is the Spiral Tarot, which is one of my favourite decks of all time. Do I say that for at least like 10 of my decks? I feel like I have a very strong, solid like top 10. Also, we'll put the also in. But this is a deck that I've done a review on. This, I think, is one of the most underrated decks that I know of. I genuinely think it's so beautiful. I mean, I know people get stuck on these borders, and I get it, but I would implore you to just attempt to get past the borders if this appeals to you at all. Because obviously you can modify it. I've seen people colour the borders in, I've seen people trim it. I don't know, I've kind of just grown to accept it, and now I kind of like them in a weird way. But just some of these images, it's very Rider-Waite-Smith based, but it's just beautiful, and the major arcana especially just go to a whole new level with meanings and archetypes and symbolism. You can very much just read them as kind of more Rider-Waite-Smith. But if you get your opportunity, if you have an opportunity to get your hands on the original guidebook, which is this one here, it's not super long. It's like 150-ish pages, but it is genuinely, I think, one of the best tarot books or tarot guidebooks ever. the creator has just put so much thought into this art and to the archetypes that she's included, and it's a very, very psycho-spiritual, especially psycho. It's a very psychological deck. And I just think it's incredible. There's a lot of like movement and dance, and I don't know, it feels alive. The colors are rich. Who else accidentally leaves these cards in all the time? And this is one of my favorite Two of Swords. I just think it's so beautiful. And especially with the major arcana, there's like a lot of gods and goddesses or stories from mythology that are very specifically detailed in these cards, and she does a great job of explaining them in the guidebook, and really explaining the specific symbolism, and as you can see, especially with the major arcana, there is a lot of symbols. It doesn't get in the way. Like, I read with this deck for quite a while before I read the book. It's one of my favorite Three of Pentacles too. And I read with it fine. It was still great. But when I read the guidebook, I was just kind of like, oh wow. There's a lot more to this deck than maybe first meets the eye. I do obviously also have my copies of the Dreslyn Tarot, which, if you've seen my video, you know, I've had issues with this, or these decks. Not really decks that I don't think I'll be using. I don't really know what I'm doing with them at this stage. Really cool concept, but not cards that I'm enjoying right now. But I still kind of felt like this is a collection video. I'm supposed to show you all of the tarot decks that I have. I think we're nearly done. Here we have the Star Tarot by Katey McClelland. Now this is a deck that I was waiting for. I was one of those nerds who was following the creation of this deck for quite a while, and it's finally here. I of course trimmed and edged mine in silver, and I think it looks totally fabulous. However, I'm having a lot more trouble connecting with this deck than I thought I would. I was kind of under the assumption that this deck would be like one of the key decks for me, and perhaps it still will be, but like, I've read through the book and I don't know, I'm struggling with it a little bit. Not because it's not beautiful, like it's not at all Kathy's fault. It's just, you know, sometimes that connection either doesn't happen or it takes a while to happen. And so that's what I'm kind of navigating right now. Navigating the star. Huh. Anyway, yeah, it's beautiful. I do kind of wish someone other than Shiver had published it, but you know, at least with Shiver we get a nice book and a nice box, I guess. Anyway, Katey McClelland's art is just beautiful, and it's such a wonderful take on the tarot. I think it's still tarot, but it's kind of out of the box a little bit too, and packed full of symbols, and yeah, very, very thoughtfully created deck, and a true labor of love that has taken many, many years to create. And last but not least is my Watersprite Tarot. Oh, this deck is such a wonderful deck, and I think it's another one that I think is really underrated too. It is done by an Australian creator, so I understand that shipping can be a bit expensive for those of you who don't live in Australia. But I mean, I kind of feel like we pay lots of shipping for all of the American and British and European and every other place decks, and the few Australian decks we have, I think we have some pretty cool decks, and I don't know, I think that this one would be worth the investment personally, but perhaps I'm biased. I've done a review of this deck. I think it's a really, really fabulous, deep deck. I've said it before, and I'll say it again, that this deck reminds me of the Hierophant. I feel like if the Hierophant were a deck, it would be this deck, which you might not necessarily suspect at first glance, but that's definitely how it comes across for me. It's a really, really beautiful deck, and you can get a guidebook separately. and it's a good little guidebook too, although I don't think you need it, because this deck is really, it's traditional in a lot of ways, isn't it? And it's a really great deck. It's kind of a combination of Marseille and Rider-Waite, although I have heard that it's more based on Marseille, although the pips might suggest otherwise. I'm not really sure. But it's a great little deck, and I love it. And it always kind of comes out for me more in summer. It's one of my favorite Eight of Swords cards. So I'm really excited that we're heading back into summer in this half of the world. Another card that I just totally love. So hopefully I'll be spending a bit more time with the wonderful Watersprite Tarot. So those are all of my tarot decks at the moment. I'm looking around my room just double checking that I haven't forgotten anything, but I'm pretty sure I'm good this time. I'm really happy with most of my collection at the moment. There's a few decks that I'm still struggling to connect with and working through, but I mean, I noticed myself saying a lot in this video, this is one of my all-time favorites, and it's true. I have a lot of decks in my life that I just genuinely love and use a lot, and that come up time and time again for really great readings for me, and I feel really, really blessed and happy about that. I will leave the names of all of these decks in the description box. I do that for all of my videos. Whenever I mention decks, their names are in the description box of my videos. So if you've missed some, check the description box. If you have other questions, feel free to ask. So that's all from me this time, guys. I will see you again very soon with my Oracle deck collection video. Until then, so much love. Bye.